Welcome everyone to our final session of UAA. This is Motivational Academic Advising toward a new model of academic advising based on motivational interviewing. My name is Kara Wiley. I'm your moderator for today and on the UAA committee. Just as a reminder before I introduce our speaker, we do have the EndNote speaker, the EndNote session at 1 o'clock today. And we will also be doing the Advisor of the Year award during that session. So the link was sent out previously in an email, so it's going to be with everybody together. So please join us at 1 p.m. for the final EndNote speaker and Advisor of the Year award. So today we have Tom Lilligren from Utah State University, and he is going to be speaking on motivational academic advising. So Tom, take it away.
All right, well, thanks so much, Kara, and I'm excited to be here today and to presenting to you all. Thank you for those of you who are joining. So this is about motivational academic advising and towards the development of a theory of advising based on motivational interviewing. And like Kara mentioned, I'm Tom Lilligren from Utah State. I'm the director over the College of Humanities and Social Science Advising Center. And as a start, I'd like to ask you a question. And I know we have a little bit of delay here, so it might be a little tricky, but I'd invite you to share any comments that you have in our Q&A as well. But I want to ask you a question to think about. For those of you who've been advising for a little while, what has changed about advising over the last few years for you? And for those of you who may be newer to advising, think about what messages are you hearing the most from your administration about when they talk about advising? How is it that they talk about advising? And as you're thinking about that, so if we were in a room, I'd ask you to raise your hands if these are some of the main things that you're hearing. So as you're hearing or some of the changes you're seeing and as the messages that you're hearing from administration, are you hearing about retention initiatives? Are you hearing about measurable goals and graduation? Are you talking about targeted outreach? And are you talking about utilizing data within advising? My guess is there's a good chance that these are some of the main things that you may be hearing from your administration as well. And so, and I like that, yeah, Kara mentioning that advising becoming really mainstream. Yeah, I think this is a great time and that we are hearing advising being talked about. It's being mentioned by, the highest levels of administration. It's also being mentioned even in popular media and news articles as we talk about the importance of retention and oftentimes things like using data in advising. So we're getting a lot of attention in that way. However, it's also showing that we're seeing that part of the reason I guess we're getting this attention is because advising is consistently shown to have a big impact on student retention and on other markers of student success. So we're expected to make that impact, to produce results. And all of those things that we mentioned, from targeted outreach, retention initiatives, graduation, those are kind of measurable outcomes that we're expected to have an impact on. And while I think that all these outcomes are great goals, and I think that all of these things we mentioned can be useful in and of themselves. They're not these aren't gonna, like, having these goals or doing these outreach doesn't necessarily lead to the outcomes. I think what's really going to be the key, as always with advising, is individual day-to-day interactions that we have with students. To me, the relationship that we have with students is always going to be the key part of advising. The thing I might say the most is advising is relational. So what I want to talk about with motivational interviewing, motivational academic advising, is how can we make those relationships as powerful of a factor as possible to increase student success. And so I want to talk a little about how motivational interviewing can give us a framework to really make those individual meetings and individual contacts we have with students as impactful as possible. So first, I want to introduce a little bit about why I view the need for having a different theory of advising. So I'm going to share my screen here. And so I want to think a little bit about this big picture. So that, I think if we look a little bit at some of the history of advising, we've seen that advising theory, we've become as a field, more holistic, more student-focused, more personal in our approach for advising. And so I think any new theory is going to have to be able to fit that as well. But I think that for me, we need something that's going to help us to really maximize that impact that we can make along the way. So I feel like a new theory, and also I should say, give a specific structure and kind of a toolbox of techniques that we can use in order to make that impact. So the 4 things that I think would be essential, and the reason why I think it's helpful to have some additional theory is, one, that I think a theory needs to build on these previous theories. And we've got some really great development of theory within our field. And I think that there's a number of different theories that really inform what I'm talking about with this as well, from structure imposed of advising that are offered in things like strength-based advising and appreciative advising, to a lot of ideas from self-authorship theory and other areas that really give kind of a holistic view of students. So I think there's a lot of great theories out there to build on. But I think a theory also needs to provide a structure for advising and to support student success. So I think in the past, a limitation of some of the theory that we had with advising is that oftentimes it was more of kind of a broad approach as opposed to something that might provide a lot of structure or a lot of specific ideas or techniques that we can use in meeting with students. And so my hope is that this can be something that provides a little bit more specific, a little bit more specific structure and specific ideas that we can put into practice. So building off of that, and we want to have a theory that does include some of those concrete methods, specific techniques to work towards positive outcomes. And also, I think it's important to know that we need that for a theory to be really to give structure to what we do, it has to incorporate a lot of the things that we do that might not be those individual in-person appointments. I know that I'm guessing for all of us, there's probably a lot of time that we spend not meeting with a specific student, but instead doing other things that might be related to that. From, like we talked about with that, like with outreach to students, or it might be helping out with events. And I think that a theory needs to incorporate what is the purpose of those things. How can we talk about maybe what the purpose of those things is, and maybe some things that might fall outside that, so it can provide a little bit of structure to that too. So now I've talked a little bit about why I think a new theory is needed. I want to look at some about an introduction to what motivational interviewing is. And motivational interviewing, so just as a starting point here, okay. Motivational interviewing is so it's a theory that was started by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, who were both working in addiction treatment in the early 90s, and so they were seeing that's a field that has oftentimes is dealing with a lot of resistance from clients, and can be a really difficult field to have long-standing success in as well with for a lot of clients. So since that time, it's been adapted from addiction treatment to psychotherapy in general, but also it's gone beyond that to the health field, to education, and it's had positive results in a lot of different settings. So for example, it's helped people who might be recovering from any number of different medical conditions to adhere more closely to treatment, to the treatment that can help them to get better. And it's also been practiced by people from therapists and social workers, like it was developed, but also been practiced by educators, by healthcare workers, without necessarily having to have an extensive background in mental health counseling or anything. So it's a theory that has been quite useful in a lot of different settings. So let's see here. So the basic definition of motivational interviewing is that it's a collaborative conversation style to strengthen a person's own motivation to change. So at its core, it's really about increasing the client's motivation and commitment to change, or in our case, the student's motivation. But I want to dig into that just a little bit deeper. So if we The technical definition of motivational interviewing has a few different components part of it. I want to look at these a little bit individually to understand what motivational interviewing is. So it's a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communicating with particular attention to the language of change. So it's about arranging conversations. This is a quote from the founders of this theory: arranging conversations so that people talk themselves into change based on their own values of interests. So I want to talk maybe about some of the foundational ways that we do that. And so one of them, oftentimes we might think of these kind of two polar different ways of interacting, directing and following. And most likely, I don't think any of us probably do either one of these things all the way, but it can maybe be a little way of thinking about it, with directing being where the expert tells the client what to do, where the advisor tells the student what to do. And then in following, so in advising, we might think of that as being prescriptive advising. In following, it would be just kind of the client taking the lead, the student taking the lead, and us not really, just kind of going along exactly with what they're saying without providing a lot of value or direction along with it. The goal of motivational interviewing is to be kind of right in the middle with guiding, so that we're really building a partnership to work together towards the goals. So that we should be actively helping the client to reach their goals, actively helping to build upon their suggestions, but that still at the center of that is that we're working with the student to develop their own specific goals and their own direction, not just to their academics, but also even to that individual appointment, so that they're really taking an active role in developing that. An analogy that I have that I apologize if there's people from Utah State here, because I think I've used this analogy plenty of times, but it reminds me of, I did some traveling and went to Thailand a number of years ago. And this is one of my first times abroad. I'd never been to Thailand before. And we had the chance to have a guide with us for part of 2 days while we were there. And that was a great experience, because this guide had obviously a lot more knowledge than we ever would have. So she guided us. She found out first what we wanted to have from our experience. So she learned what we wanted to learn while we were in Thailand, what we wanted to experience. From that point, she helped us to plan out what we could do. She helped us get familiar with the language, the history, the culture of Thailand, so we could kind of understand more of what we were experiencing along the way. She also connected us to other experiences that we never would have probably had unless we had met with her. So for example, I'm just going to share, this is a picture of one of the things. This isn't the exact thing, but this is a picture of it was a spun sugar thing that we purchased from the side of a road at a little food stand. And it was amazing, but it actually looked even more like human hair in person than it does in that picture what we had. And I don't think I ever would have tried something like that. But she was able to connect to something that was it was really a great thing to try. Also, that she helped us to have kind of an unending supply of water bottles on what was a ridiculously hot day for each of those days in hot and humid day in Thailand. And I think just like that, us as guides, we are helping students to navigate the culture and the language of higher education. But also we rely on the student for the direction of where they want to go. So just like that tour guide was going to first find out what we wanted to have from our traveling experience, we rely first on knowing what the student wants to get from their university experience. But then along the way, we can help connect them to meaningful curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular experiences that can enhance their education. And while we might not have an unending supply of water bottles on a hot day, I think we're there in that same way as sort of that consistent support that students can rely on. And so all those things help us to sort of to continue being in that guiding role. The next part of motivational interviewing that I want to talk a little bit about that's essential to motivational interviewing is this motivational interviewing mindset. And this is the 4 different things they say are essential to really develop this effective relationship with the student. So first is partnership, just kind of like I discussed before in that guiding relationship. The second is acceptance. So valuing the student's autonomy, accepting who they are and what they're, and that ultimately that we respect their goals and their decisions, even if, or maybe even especially if we don't agree with them or understand them. Because I know that can be hard when we feel like a student's making a poor decision. But with the goal is that with this we can kind of accept and value their autonomy even when we may not agree with it. The third, have compassion. So being genuine in our care and concern for the student. And I would say that each of these first three values, partnership, acceptance, and compassion, aren't particularly unique to motivational interviewing. I think any theory of advising or counseling is probably going to have all of those factors in some degree as part of it. But the fourth one is what really makes it unique, and this is evoking. So this is really the defining characteristic of motivational interviewing, and this is where we are consistently, as we listen to the student, trying to increase the motivation that they have, increase their ability to follow through on that by the way that we interact with them. So that and we'll talk about some of the specific ways we do that, but one of the main things is just by helping them to recognize some of the recognize the strengths and the motivation and the values that they're talking about, and then from there connect that to how they can actually follow through and accomplish those things that they might be talking about as being a value to them. So then, we talked about kind of that evoking as being that defining part. What's characteristic of that is to strengthen the personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal. So the idea is by the way that we talk and interact with them that we can help the student to increase that motivation and commitment. And then we do that by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within that acceptance, that attitude of acceptance and compassion. And the reason why I feel like this is really a key is because it's based on this idea that ultimately we could tell the student what we might have great ideas of what the student should or shouldn't do. Oftentimes we might have a real specific path that the student could go on that we know that could work well for them. But oftentimes if we're simply suggesting that to them, then they might be actually less likely to pursue it if they're being told to just specifically a route to go. If you can think of this, like I love going to movies, and so for me, if I hear someone who talks about a movie that they really enjoy, a lot of times that makes me want to go see it. But there are still some shows I can think where, I can think every time I might talk to my parents and they recommend that I have to see this particular movie. If there's that feeling where we're being imposed upon, then it changes it from being willingly listening to guidance from someone who we value as an expert or value their opinion of, to something where I don't like someone telling me what to do. So you might even make it less likely to follow through on it. So that's the way what motivational interviewing is focused on is having those conversations in a way that can actually really increase the follow through. And then the last part that I really wanted to highlight here is that it does have kind of a specific 4 foundational processes that are central to it as well. So first is engaging. So establishing that mutual working relationship with the student or with the client. Second, focusing. So that's where we go from having kind of a lot of different things that we could talk about with the student to having maybe some specific things that we're going to focus on during that limited amount of time. Third, evoking. And this is helping the client to, like we talked about, to really explore their own motivation and connect that to how they're going to create positive change. And the last one is planning. So that's taking that motivation and then connecting it. So here's the way that you can actually follow through and accomplish that, those things that you want to, that you want to with that. And these are considered, even though these are 4 processes that sort of look like they're sequential, they may not always be that way. There might be times where we have to revisit that engaging stage because it seems like maybe we're going in a wrong direction. There might be times where we have to revisit focusing because it seems like maybe that there might be, we might not be addressing all the things that the student might want in an interview or in our meeting with them. So, so we might kind of go back and forth between these areas as well. So next I want to focus a little bit on what motivational academic advising could be. and how this can work, how motivational interviewing can work as the foundation for what could really be a comprehensive advising theory. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that motivational interviewing easily fits within an advising context, because I think there's some that I think most of the theory I think really fits well within advising, and I know that that's something that's been explored by a number of other people, and have written about it in the past too, about the ways that motivational interviewing can be adapted towards advising. But I say I think there's also some ways that it needs to be adapted a little bit to fit more within an advising context if it's going to be kind of a foundational theory for how you approach advising. So first, maybe I'll talk a little about some of the ways that it has that natural fit. So one is just like motivational interviewing, I think in advising we recognize that that we need to have this exchange of information where both us and the student are both bringing our own expertise into the advising relationship. So for us to really be able to work effectively towards the goal, then both of us need to be kind of sharing that expertise so that we can kind of build off that. And I think that we probably have a good idea of the expertise that we bring with us. So we know a lot about the programs that we advise. We have information about our institutions, about the resources we have on campus. But we also have expertise that comes from our experience with students. Our experience knowing oftentimes what can help students to be successful within our programs or within the university in general, or knowing how students might have reach similar goals as the student we're meeting with did, what helped them to be successful. So I think we have a lot of experience with that. But I think sometimes it can be tricky to recognize the similar expertise, well, I shouldn't say similar, but the equally important expertise that the student has. We rely on the information from the student to know about how all of these things, this information that we have, this expertise that we have, is going to apply to them. So what are the students' strengths? What are the students' values and driving motivations that are going to influence them to want to pursue and to succeed in college? I think each of those things are really crucial to understand if we're going to be able to really mutually work together. I think about this a little bit, and I know that the coaching relationship is one that's been kind of written and talked about some in advising as well. And I think if we could think about a sports coach, that if you were going to successfully coach an individual or a team, it would be awfully hard to do that without knowing the strengths of each individual player and knowing kind of how those strengths kind of fit in within the context of what that player was involved in. So in that same way, we really rely on the students to get to know what their strengths are, what their interests are, to see not only that they might be a student in such and such major, but how that major really fits within that context of who they are. So, so it's that sharing of expertise that really makes it most effective. Right. Next is that motivational interviewing mindset, and here it's called the motivational academic advising mindset, because I think each of these things are equally applicable to motivational or to academic advising as well. And I think that, again, just like I mentioned with motivational interviewing, I don't think that acceptance and partnership and compassion are particularly unique to this theory at all. I think we'd find that in anything, but that evoking is quite unique and something that is, that I will spend time talking about some of the specific ways that we can do that within advising. Additionally, I think these 4 processes fit easily within advising as well. But I want to share a little bit about kind of why I particularly like these 4 processes for academic advising. To me, I think the strength of these 4 processes is that not only are they offer kind of specific steps that oftentimes can fit within an advising experience, but they focus, to me, the focus on isn't so much what we're doing at those stages, but instead on why. It focuses on what we want the student to get out of each of those stages. And I to me, I feel like that helps to kind of guide me on what I need to be doing in order and what I need to be focusing on in the student to hope that they get out that experience. So it's not so much, am I introducing myself effectively to the student? It's, is the student being able to engage in this advising experience and start to really connect? It's not so much like that is the student leaving the advising appointment with a defined plan, as it is the student connecting with how they can actually accomplish that plan? Are they connecting with the motivation and the value and the ability to really to accomplish that plan? So each of these stages are really focused on what the student can get out of it. However, I mentioned that I don't think that I think that motivational interviewing has to be adapted a little bit to really to function as kind of a full theory in advising. And to me, the main difference is in the overall goal. I mentioned that motivational interviewing is really drawn from the addiction field, and has been used a lot, to increase adherence within recovery from injuries or health challenges. In each of those things, there might be a specific change that we're hoping that the client might go through. In a treatment scenario, like in psychotherapy, you might be helping the student to hopefully helping the client to make changes in their life so that they don't, so they feel more satisfied with their life situation, or can overcome some of the challenges they might be facing. In advising, we're not quite in that same situation. We're not necessarily looking to produce a specific change in a student, but instead, our goal is to really increase the growth and the success of that student. That may or may not already be happening. A lot of students come in with already that really built in them, where they are ready and willing and have the capability to succeed. Our goal isn't necessarily to change that, but our goal is to try to enhance that and to try to help them to make that more specific, and make their experience as meaningful as possible. So in this way, we don't necessarily have quite as much of a specific focus that the student would work towards, but it's more important that we make sure that we're figuring out what that goal is, for the student, on what growth they want to have and what success they want it to lead to. So next, I want to focus for a lot of the rest of this time on what some of the specific ways are that motivational interviewing, what that would look like for within an advising context. So I'm going to go through each of these stages of engaging and focusing, evoking, and a little bit on planning about what that can look like within an advising context. And I want to just be really clear too that this is by no means an extensive exploration of the different tools and techniques that you might use within motivational interviewing, but hopefully a little bit of an introduction to that and how it fits within an advising context. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of some of the ways that that I felt like that it's really been meaningful for me when I've tried to implement that within advising as well. So first, I want to talk a little about engaging, and so I think with this, obviously, we talk about that. I want to talk about the specific ways that this can kind of guide our practice of engaging. And I'm going to lead off by talking about some of the ways that sometimes that we make it so students aren't engaged. And I think that these things are certainly not out of bad intentions, but still can be a really easy way to decrease the engagement of our students that we're meeting with. And there's two particular things they talk about in motivational interviewing that can be disengagement factors. The writing reflex and the expert trap, which I think are closely related. And I know personally, this is an easy thing for me to fall into. And I think as advisors, oftentimes it can be, because we wouldn't be in this field if we didn't want to help people. If we didn't want to try to help our students and when someone is struggling, to throw them a rope and help them out. But at the same time, let's say, well, sometimes that can be a negative. So if we're answering a question about what a student's registration date is, or about the degree requirements, or maybe the plan of a student working towards the major, that certainly isn't this writing reflex or an expert trap. But oftentimes we might be getting questions about, deciding between 2 elective classes within a major. Which one's going to be the best fit? Should I do a study abroad this summer? Or I'm looking at different minor options. Which one should I take? We want to be helping students, and we might have there's a good chance we would have really good suggestions and good and information that could help students to make these decisions. But if we're just that influence to want to just immediately help out can sometimes make it so that the student doesn't go through the process of really being able to explore these choices, or even that process of kind of thinking through it that might make them more likely to follow through on it in the first place. So that's kind of that writing reflex, and the expert trap is similarly when that relationship turns into sort of the expert advisor and the pupil student, where they come to us just it maybe is sort of a guru type relationship to try to help them out. That doesn't mean that we're not helping in those situations, but we might be missing on the chance to have the type of discussion that could really help to increase the students' follow through on it. So that's why those two things can both be potential traps that can make students kind of not being as engaged in this advising relationship as they might be otherwise. The other one I wanted to highlight is the premature focus trap. And I think this is another one that can be awfully easy to do. That oftentimes students are coming to us for specific reasons. One of the roles that I serve as an advisor is working with students who have academic standing challenges. So when those students are meeting with me, there's a very specific purpose of why they're meeting with me. They want to resolve a hold. They're required to meet with me. And there's probably information that I want to make sure that they get during that meeting as well. I'm sure that most of this during our meetings with students, there's probably certain information we want to make sure the student comes away from. The trap can be that if we focus just on those things, or jump to what are those things that might be most important to us that we cover in that appointment, we might be missing out on other things that might be equally important to the student or more important to cover before for the student to really engage. So if we're missing out on some of the things that are most important to the student, then they might not be paying attention as much to what we're talking about. I want to share an example of this to an experience from my own advising. I was working with a student who I felt like who I'd worked with a number of times and had a pretty good relationship with, and had what I felt like was an appointment that was decent. I think we made a plan for upcoming semesters. We talked about how things were going for him. It was a fairly normal appointment, but it just felt like something was off, and he didn't feel like he was particularly there. Or I just kind of left feeling like we didn't really connect during that meeting. And honestly, those meetings for me are the most frustrating appointments that I have. Appointments where I leave just feeling like, gosh, I just felt like I was just talking to a wall. Like I didn't get anything back from that student. I don't know. I didn't get any. I'm not sure we made any sort of connection at all. And so during that appointment, I guess that something stood out to me enough that and maybe because I already had this previous relationship with the student too, and met with him a number of times, but I sent him a follow-up email and just asked him, maybe I'm wrong, but it just seemed like maybe you weren't feeling very good today. I just wanted to check and make sure there wasn't anything else that you wanted to talk about. And the student came back the next day and unloaded about some of the challenges they've been having, about their challenges they were having with their partner and with their mental health, and a lot of things that probably I'm not going to be the person who can be a whole lot of help in solving. But I was able to connect them to a lot of resources, and the student was getting the help that to them was most important to their education. Like these were the things that were impacting them the most at that time. And I feel like that was a good example to me that it makes me wonder how many times I didn't notice those signs of the student who might have been struggling or not connecting, or maybe not done that kind of check-in afterwards that might have been important. But so I've tried to think of ways that to maybe make sure I'm not missing some of those things, because I know in that case that it was really changed our advising, but also helped to connect the student to the resources that could really most help them at that time. So next, let's see. So the goal of this engaging stage, more than anything, is to really wanting to move from talking about to move towards talking more about values and goals, because really these are going to be the motivation for most of the students' actions, is going to be to do things that are priorities to them, do things that are personally valuable and important to them. So even if we have good reasons for something, that might not influence a student near as much as if they feel like it's personally meaningful. So next I want to talk a little maybe about the focusing stage. And I think this is one of the tools that they suggest I want to talk a little is agenda mapping as a tool that can really help with focusing. I think the goal with this whole stage is really to put the student in charge of what the focus of the appointment is. And so this agenda mapping can be a good way to invite the student to do that. And it's really pretty basic. I don't think there's anything brilliant about it, but or necessarily even novel about it, but it's something that could be really effective. And it's sort of like taking a step back from the meeting to instead talk about kind of the why and the structure of the meeting. So talk about why we're talking about what we're talking about. It's looking at, like, it's a little bit of a meta meeting, and I think that was a pretty confusing way to introduce that. But so an example, I can think the other day I had a student who came in and was asking a lot of questions about college and starting out college, and it was their first appointment with an advisor. In that situation, there's definitely information I wanted to give them about their major that they were looking to pursue, and I think it's important for me that they come away having that knowledge. But so the way I tried to approach it with this agenda mapping is I said, well, how about we spend a little bit of time answering each of your questions, and then after that maybe we can talk more about some of the specifics of your major requirements. Does that sound okay to you? So in that, like, the student went through a list of about 5 or 10 questions, and then some of which ended up kind of leading towards talking more about the major requirements and some of the introduction to the major as well. But it kept it so that the student was kind of in charge of that relationship, or in charge of that, in charge of the time that we spent together. And so I think that to me was my attempt to do that. And I'm always amazed with this, just how willing students are sometimes that there might be other things that come up or things they'd like to discuss, and that they're willing to share that when they have an opportunity to do so. I think one thing that I found really valuable, I always liked, okay, someday I'm looking forward to going back to this, but in the past with working with students in person, I enjoy walking a student outside the office at the end of the appointment. And so just kind of trying to walk them back to our waiting area that we have in front of our office. And it's not uncommon during that time that a student might mention something else that they want to talk about, or something else might come up that they forgot about, and we end up having them come right back in the office, and we talk about that for another second. But I think having that opportunity for them to just make sure that there's nothing that they're leaving that they wanted to address kind of keeps them in charge of the relationship, and makes it so that they're really focusing on the things that are going to be most relevant to that student. Let's see. Next, I want to spend a lot of the rest of our time talking about evoking. And again, this is sort of where the rubber hits the road with motivational interviewing. This is kind of the defining step of motivational interviewing that makes it really unique. But even though it's what's really defining about it, it's all based on how effective we can do these other steps too. If the student's not engaged, or if we're focusing on something that's not what's really relevant to the student, then the type of conversations that are really going to be leading to this evoking just aren't going to happen. And so evoking, as a reminder, is the process of helping the student to elicit their own motivation, so their own ability to progress towards their goals, and also helping a student to resolve ambivalence or resistance along their path. And that's a lot of what motivational interviewing is designed on. If we can think about it coming from the addiction treatment area, addiction is an area where a lot of times there is a lot of resistance, where someone might not necessarily feel they have a problem, or might disagree about the severity of what their addiction is. So it's designed to kind of roll with that and not have that become an obstacle towards making change. So a lot of that is through addressing ambivalence. So the goal of this focusing stage, I should mention, is one, to be able to recognize when students are using language that are talking about working towards their goals and that. But ultimately, the goal is to try to be have us be eliciting that language, us, cause them to reflect on that and to reflect on their strengths and their goals and their values based on what we're asking to. And a big way of doing that is addressing ambivalence. And this is based on that people have a basic desire for congruence between what their values are and what their behavior is. Or we could think about between what their goals are and what their behavior is or what they're working towards. And when there's a difference between those, that oftentimes that's where there's a motivation for change or for growth. So advising, this might mean recognizing a gap between where a student is and between their goals, or it might be recognizing that maybe some of their goals might even conflict with each other. And so understanding what those, what that means to the student. So the goal of this stage of addressing ambivalence is really to sort of like have the student start to go through this process of seeing what they need to do to resolve these areas that might be difficult to make sense of in working towards their goals, and to kind of talk themselves into some of the changes on how to reach that point. So let's see. So for example, I'm going to bring up. You can think of a situation I ran into with a handful of students who were looking to, in the past, who were looking towards going towards a certain major, but maybe struggling to get the GPA for that major. And there might be multiple ways that we could approach that. So we might know from our experience that it's going to be really tough for a student to reach that particular GPA they need, or that standard of performance. But if we started out with just pointing out, it looks like you're really going to have a hard time reaching this. That's likely going to put up a wall between us and that student. The student might kind of dig in and think, well, you don't know what I'm capable of, or kind of dig into the direction they want to go. As an alternative to that, it might be saying like, okay, so here's where your GPA would need to be to go in this direction. Do you want to look a little about what it would take to improve your GPA to that point, and looking at some of the specific options on that, oftentimes which might be really difficult. That might lead to the student, instead of putting up resistance, they can be seeing exactly what they would have to do either to reach their goal of continuing along that path, or to start to look at how they can resolve that gap between their desire to reach that GPA and get into the major, and what might be realistic for their for their performance, or even time or money, or all the other things involved within education. So really looking at what's going to be realistic for that student. That can help lead to more of a discussion. Well, if it seems like this is going to be tough, why don't we look at some other degree options that could be an option for you? Or why don't we look at some other resources that might help you along the way too? So as we're exploring ambivalence, it sort of naturally leads to conversations about goals, conversations about values, and about kind of moving towards moving towards some of the specifics of how to reach those. So I think it's kind of just naturally leads to that language. So the goal is oftentimes we might start by recognizing these things we call progress talk, or in motivational interviewing, they call it change talk. So when we hear students talking about their desire, their ability, their reason, their need, as soon as we start hearing these things, then that's what we want to recognize. That we want to really make sure that the students recognizing what they're saying on that. So like they're saying, well, I really recognize I need to improve my GPA. Awesome. So then that's what we okay. So you see that your GPA improving your GPA is going to be a big part for you of getting where you want to go. So and then that's kind of inviting them to elaborate more on that. Or you might say, so you've said that. So some of the reasons why you want to do this degree is because you think because it's going to help give you some of the background that you need in order to start a business that you've explored in this area, kind of exploring those specific reasons. But the goal to move this progress talk of recognizing what's important to them to commitment talk, to where they move from I want to I will, I'm ready to, here's how I'm going to do it. So that's this moving more to that commitment level and moving that to where it might be just broadly, I will graduate, to I will, plan on taking these classes in addition to meeting with faculty or counselor to talk about my graduate school process of applying to graduate school. So preparing for those specific steps. Another specific technique that I want to talk about, and this is one of my favorites, is using sort of the student ruler during the appointment. And I'm amazed by how well this works a lot of time. Is asking them if you wanted to kind of get more information. So like I mentioned, I advise for students who are on academic standing, have academic standing problems. And one of the questions I ask almost all those students is, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being there's no point in taking next semester, there's no way I'm going to succeed in it, I'm going to get straight Fs, to 10 being I can't fail, everything's going great, there's no way I'm not going to succeed this semester. Where are you going to be, or where do you feel like you are right now? And say a student might say a 7. So that opens up a chance to again lead to more reflection on this. You can say, okay, so there's 7. So you feel sounds like you feel kind of confident on where you're going next semester. So, or on how you're likely to succeed. So what makes it a 7 instead of a 6? And that gives the student a chance to really talk about, well, I've worked really hard on improving my study skills, or I've learned that I learned to balance my work with home, and learn some different strategies on it, so they can really reflect on what those strengths are. So there's a chance to really boost some of those strengths. But then also you can ask, well, why is it a 7 instead of an 8 or a 9? And that gives them a chance to reflect what are the changes that they need to make. So you're kind of going right back to what are the things what are some of their strengths are, but then what are the changes? What would they need to do different in order to feel like they were going to have an even greater chance of succeeding? And so even just a simple question like that can provide more of an opportunity for that discussion. Then the last part of motivational interviewing, and I'm not going to talk about this one a lot because I feel like it's one that we oftentimes have the most expertise in and do really well as advisors, is to help students to plan. And I think some of the keys to that is from motivational interviewing, motivational academic advising perspective, is to always remember that kind of co-planning, and that both the student and the advisor are playing a big role within that relationship and planning. But also, sometimes that there can be specific approaches that can make planning more effective. And I really like this elicit, provide, elicit recommendation for how to kind of provide advice. Obviously, for a lot of us, our job title is advisor, right? Students come to us expecting us to offer specific advice, and I think that we'd be letting them down if we didn't. But if we offer it in a way that follows this sort of puts them in charge of what they do with the information, it can still make them more likely to reflect on it, to accept it, and to want to find out more or follow up on it. So kind of a way to approach that is to first elicit feedback from the student. So you might ask permission. So it might be like, it's okay if I share with you a couple ideas of what I've seen other students that have really helped other students in a similar situation of yours. Or it's okay, maybe you're looking at some different minor options. And it's okay if maybe I have a few that come to mind based on what you're interested in, and the ones that might interest you. So we're kind of asking their permission to share, to give them advice. Also, we might be clarifying kind of what they know, or what exactly they want to know. Then we provide the advice, try to make it very clear. But then this next step of then asking for their feedback. So it might not just be, so it might be, okay, so here's a few minors that seem like related to what interests you. How do you feel about that? Or do any of these jump out to you as being ones that really interest you? So that even though we're giving the student advice, it's kind of like sandwiched in between, making sure that the student is part of that process. So that's my quick overview of motivational interviewing, but especially how motivational academic advising can be a broad theory that can be that I think can be used in advising. I'm hoping I don't consider myself to ever be an expert in all things motivational interviewing. I think it's a continuing thing that I'm trying to get personal experience and personal expertise, but I'm looking to kind of develop this further, and hopefully do some research going forward on how to train and to see some of the effects on this on students as well. So I know we're about out of time here, but if I'm happy to certainly you might be able to ask some questions if you have in the comment on a quick time and the little bit of time that we have here, as well as you're welcome to. I'm going to put in the Q&A what my contact info is too, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me as well.
Thank you, Tom, so much for your presentation. I love Emma. I'm so glad you did this today. I just want to remind everybody that at 1 p.m. our final session with the Advisor of the Year Award and our EndNote speaker will begin. Just click on the link that was sent in an email, and that would be great. If there's anybody that wants to ask a question to Tom or make a final comment, we're waiting to see if there's anything like that. But otherwise, you guys are welcome to take the break real quick before we go into our final session at 1 p.m. with the Academic Advisor of the Year Award and our EndNote speaker. If we were all in person, Tom, I would have everybody give you a round of applause because that was so great. And I thank you so much for presenting on that today. I don't see anything else in the Q&A. And we are out of time. So please make sure that you guys check out Tom's contact information in the Q&A if you want to ask him a question. That would be great. Thanks for joining, everyone. Bye-bye.